All right, welcome. It's Thursday, April 23rd. Thought I would update everyone on what's been going on in the garden. We had a couple inches of rain, not a couple inches, we had an inch 70 or so 2 nights ago. I'm pretty happy about that, not just for the rain, but for the fact that these storms that came through had some hellacious hail and tore some places up. Thankfully, not here, although I was very worried about that. There were also tornadoes last night, but again, fortunately, not here. So, a couple things I wanted to update everyone on here. You can see I uncovered my canna lily. It's late April, so I decided it was time to do that. It's pretty low probability that we're going to get another freeze, so I went ahead and uncovered it. You've probably seen the last few times that I have those T-posts on either side of it. The reason for that, of course, is to trellis it. As I've said, this canna, it'll get every bit of 7 feet tall. It'll get all the way up to the soffit there. In fact, it'll get in the way of that security camera and I won't be able to see out of it sometimes. But yeah, it gets very tall. And I think part of the reason for that is that because it's not in full sun, it actually it has to reach to get sun. So it tends to try to, I guess you could say, get leggy. And then of course it gets unstable and the wind in Oklahoma will blow it completely down if I don't trellis it. So what I do is when it starts, getting so and so tall, I just use twine and, wrap it around it using these as supports. And you can't usually see the twine by the end of it, so it works pretty well. But something I have to do continuously throughout the summer. The garden continues to grow. The warm weather today, it got about 80. It really responds well to that. Peas are looking good. We've actually started to pick and eat some of the lettuce and radishes today. That lettuce, actually, we probably have another maybe 3 to 5 days to get all that eaten before it gets too big. The radishes, we probably have a week to eat. Cilantro still not very big. Cucumbers really haven't grown much. They really need hotter weather. But I did go ahead and plant my green beans and my okra. And then I did that basically 2 days before we got the big rain, which was 2 days ago also. So hopefully they survived. I think, fingers crossed, but we'll see. And then the tomatoes, you can see I got my cages around them, and I got my structure put up around them as well. Just those tomatoes, at least in years past, they'll get this tall. They don't always have a lot of fruit on them, but they at least get pretty darn big, so I always have to support them. And I just thought it would be kind of neat to have sort of a little, trellis like that. And then my green beans, we'll use that as a support to grow up against, and it usually works pretty well. Otherwise, one other thing I did, as you can see, I started to plant my containers. I just got some marigolds. I ventured out into the threatening world today, to Lowe's actually. I had to get some hardware supplies and stuff, so I went ahead and picked up some marigolds. So I planted those 2 containers. You can see I got orange and yellow, which is a deliberate choice because everything else that I have here, the perennials and that vine, will bloom purple. That's a purple clematis vine. It'll start blooming, I would say, here in the next week or so. These are purple columbines that, I had some of these years ago planted over in the Wicked garden, and they go to seed really easy. So basically what I'd started doing is scattering the seeds of those things everywhere, and they just kind of randomly come up. So that's what's going on there. And then this is actually a false indigo. I've had it for years. It used to be in a container that I built, but that container was made out of reclaimed wood and it rotted away. So I planted it in the ground, and it of course will also bloom purple. And so what I'm going to do is, you can see I have some places kind of marked out there. I'm gonna intersperse some marigolds. I think I'm gonna put the yellow and kind of red ones in through here, and that'll give a nice contrast with the purple flowering plants that will be there and start blooming later on here in the next coming weeks. Another thing that I guess I could show you all is I really haven't shown you this back sort of beds here. You can see I've got holly bushes planted back there, and my crepe myrtle, which still hasn't started to really leaf out much yet. But you can see I have 4 holly bushes there, which if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that violates the landscape aesthetic rules of odd numbers. There's actually an explanation for that. First, I planted those a long time ago, and it was really before I paid much attention to those sorts of aesthetic principles. Second, even though I did, was a bit of a novice, I still, had an idea going on, and the idea was that in between those, I would plant something, and that would have been, 3, and those really would have been sort of the specimen plantings. And actually for a while I had knockout roses there, double knockout roses. I had 3 of them there, and this was maybe 4 years ago, I think 5 years ago, when they actually died. They got a virus called witch's broom, which is incurable, makes them grow all gangly. So I took them out, and then I was left with what to do with these sort of dead spaces. And I was going to put some other kind of bush in there so I could continue with the idea that I was going to have a hedge along that back fence, which was sort of the original idea, a hedge that would be sort of mixed with the hollies and then something else. But I decided what I would do is I would just sort of use that space to experiment a little bit with, and so that's what I've done basically over the last 5 years or so. I'll just kind of start over here. You can see here what I did is that's a canna which I dug up from over just where we were before, over on the northwest side of the house. Because this is south facing, this is actually north, so this is south facing. They come up a lot sooner than the ones by the house. They also don't get near as tall. These will only get maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, and again, I think the logical explanation for that is that because they are in more of a full sun environment, they don't have to reach as far to get to the sun, so they tend to not get as tall. They tend to also not be as robust down here for some reason. They tend to be a little bit thinner, and they don't actually bloom as well for some reason. My guess is that has something to do with the soil. That is a purple coneflower that I planted there. I bought some of those over the years, and that was one where I planted it. I'll show you some other ones here in a minute. That, I think I've pointed out before, is a Texas spineless prickly pear. Supposedly it is edible. If you dig there are actually microscopic spines on it where those little dark spots are. They're not big. They call it spineless because you can't really see the spines, but they are there, and it hurts to get them in your fingers. So if you wanted to eat these, you would have to dig all of those out. But this actually came from a friend of mine, Eric, who used to live in Norman, who moved, and when he moved to Kansas City, he just broke a little bit off of it and gave it to me and said, plant it wherever you want. So I stuck it right here, and in about 5 years time, it's actually grown into this. We call it the Uncle Fish cactus because that's what Max called Eric, and all the other kids would call my friend Eric. Also alleviated a lot of confusion. Too many Erics around here. Over here is basically where I have had various cone flowers. They're mostly purple cone flowers. They're not blooming or anything yet. There's some of them that are starting to head out a little bit, like that one. But basically what I did here is I planted, I think, a little grouping of, I think, rule of 3 cone flowers right there. And, they bloomed and looked nice for a few years. And then I basically just let them go to seed. And this is the result. I just get sort of random cone flowers around here, which I like. They look nice when they bloom. There's some white ones in there as well. But yeah, like I said, it's just sort of an experimental area. This is actually a peony. I actually came from Grandma Perot's house in Cawker City. I believe Aunt Sherry dug some up and brought them back, and I went and snagged them from her. This was, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years ago by now. But this is, it's been here, as I said, 3 years, and this is the first year that it's actually set bloom, so I'm pretty happy about that. I had 2 of them back here. The other one, which was planted over on the other side of that bush, actually, it died for whatever reason, but this one is doing okay. I wouldn't say it's doing great, but it's doing okay, and I think it might make it, and if I, you know, keep it fertilized and taken care of over the years, it might turn into a nice big peony like Grandma Perot had in her backyard in Cawker City. And over here, there's some more coneflowers. That's actually a daisy that's not doing great. I've had some of those over the years and transplanted them and divided them, and you know, they just sort of have withered away. But this is something actually that I divided from out front. It is a black and blue salvia. I planted it here, and then I had a yellow lantana there to get sort of again the contrast between the really sharp, almost cobalt blue blooms that this thing puts on later in the summer, and the yellow. I usually have to replant that lantana every year because sometimes I can get them to come back, sometimes I can't. It just depends on the location, what kind of microclimate they get. But yeah, I dug this up from one that I have, a much bigger one out front. I'll show you that maybe in the coming weeks. But it'll get big. The one out front gets 3-4 feet tall and is, you know, 3 feet in diameter, but it's actually native to Brazil. And it's, you know, one of those plants that, again, is not supposed to be hardy in Oklahoma. I think it lists maybe zone 9. Oklahoma is zone 7. But I managed to get it to come back every year. So I think it's probably a little hardier than what they let on. But I really like it because it puts on sort of dark blue, cobalt blue blooms that also have a little bit of black in them, which I think is really unique. And it also attracts hummingbirds like crazy, which is another attractive feature of it. Over here, I also did some cannas, and it's sort of the same story. They get less tall over here, but they've spread like crazy over the years. Actually, sometimes put a lantana there, and that's really sort of where things are right now. Usually what I get into next, in addition to just sort of tending the vegetable garden, is I start planning out my containers. I'll start doing that over in the Wicked Garden in the next week or so, but you know, obviously doing so here. And you know, as long as we can continue getting rain like we have and avoid getting destroyed by hail, we should be in pretty good shape. So until then, have a good one.